The layaway clerk remembered him because of the shoes. They were the kind of shoes a man wears when he has decided that his feet are the last thing worth spending money on. Canvas sneakers in January, the left sole, peeling back at the toe, held together with what looked like a strip of masking tape someone had pressed down and then given up on. He came in on the 23rd of December, a Tuesday, 15 minutes before the layaway counter closed, and he stood in line behind two other people without complaint, while the sleet hit the plate glass windows of the store and the PA system cycled through the same 4 holiday songs it had been cycling through since the 1st of November. His name was Earl Booker. He was 44 years old, a maintenance technician at a mid-sized printing company out on Route 9, and he had worked the same job for 11 years. He made $31,000 a year before taxes. He had a studio apartment 12 minutes from the store, a 12-year-old Buick that he kept in careful running order because he could not afford for it to fail him, and a habit of sending $20 a month to his older sister in Memphis, whose husband had been sick for 2 years and whose medical bills had swallowed everything they had. He had no children, he had no debt beyond the monthly rent on the apartment and the insurance on the car. He had, in his checking account at the credit union on 5th Street, $412, which was what he had managed to set aside between September and December for Christmas. Earl was the kind of man whose apartment held evidence of careful living. A coffee maker that worked, a second-hand armchair by the window where he read at night, a small stack of library books on the table. He ate at home most evenings because it was cheaper, and he cooked simply, rice and beans and whatever protein was on sale on Thursday. And he did not mind any of it. He had lived frugally for long enough that it was not deprivation anymore. It was just the shape of his life, and he had made his peace with the shape. His needs were small and his habits were steady, and if the shoes were worn past their natural life, they were the shoes he had, and he wore them. And that was that. He had been standing in the layaway line 2 weeks before, on the Tuesday before that Tuesday, waiting to pay the last $30 on a small framed print he had set aside for his sister, something with a bird on a branch that he thought she would like for the kitchen. Something small to put on her wall and call her own in the season when everything else was swallowing her. He had paid it off and taken the wrapped package and stood aside, and that was when the woman in the dark green coat had stepped to the counter and received the news about her balance. He stepped to the counter when his turn came. The clerk, a woman named Donna who had worked the layaway desk for going on 9 years, asked him for his name and his account number. Earl said he did not have an account. He said he was there about someone else's. Donna had heard this before. People paid off relatives' layaways all the time this close to Christmas. She asked whose account, and Earl said he did not know the name. He said he had been standing in line 2 weeks ago, the Tuesday before, when the woman in front of him got the news that her balance was short. He said he had heard the woman tell her daughter, a girl who looked to be about 9 years old, that they would come back and get the things after New Year when she had the rest of the money together. He said the little girl had not made a sound. She had just reached up and taken her mother's hand, and they had walked back out into the cold, and the little girl had looked back once at the counter before they pushed through the door. Earl said he could not stop thinking about that look. He had gone home that Tuesday 2 weeks ago and made his dinner and sat in his armchair and tried to read, and the look had stayed. He had gone to work the next morning and kept the machines running and eaten his lunch at the break table and driven home in the Buick in the dark, and the look had stayed. It was the particular look of a child who understood more than her age should have prepared her for. Not a look of want, though want was certainly there. A look of quiet acceptance that had no business being on the face of a 9-year-old, and the Earl recognized in some deep and wordless way the same look he had learned to wear himself somewhere around the age of 12, when circumstances had required him to get good at not expecting things. He had sat with it for 2 weeks, he had run the arithmetic several times. $412 was not much of a cushion, and Christmas was coming, and his sister in Memphis was expecting the small transfer he sent each month, and the Buick's front passenger tire was showing wear that he was going to have to address. He had run all of it, and what kept surfacing, underneath all the reasonable additions and subtractions, was the image of the little girl looking back. He asked Donna if there was any way to find the account. He described the woman as best he could, medium height, wearing a dark green coat, maybe late 20s or early 30s, the little girl in a red puffer vest. He said the items on Layaway had been a pair of children's boots and a board game with a yellow box. And something else he had not seen clearly, maybe a backpack. Donna told him she could not give out account information. Earl said he understood. He said he was not asking for the name or the address. He was asking only to pay the balance. Donna looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the shoes with the masking tape on the sole. Then she looked at her screen. If you have a story like this one sitting inside you right now, something someone did that stopped you in your tracks, drop it in the comments. This world needs those stories told out loud. She found the account in 4 minutes. The last name was Reed. The layaway balance remaining was $87.40. The items were children's winter boots in a size 4, a family board game, and a small rolling backpack in navy blue. Earl Booker counted out $87 in cash from a folded envelope in his front pocket. He paid the 40 cents with coins. He signed the slip. Donna slid across the counter and he declined a receipt. He said he would not need it. He left the store at 7:41 in the evening, turned his collar up against the sleet, and walked to the parking lot. Donna watched him go through the glass doors. She had worked that counter for 9 years, and she had seen a few people pay off strangers' accounts, usually small ones, usually family situations where a cousin was covering for another cousin. She had never seen a man pay off a stranger's layaway he'd witnessed 2 weeks before for a woman whose last name he did not know and declined the receipt, and leave-in shoes held together with tape. It kept the transaction in her head after her shift ended. She drove home through the sleet and made herself dinner and thought about a man counting out coins for the 40 cents at the end, deliberate, unhurried, from the same front pocket that had held the envelope. She had asked him once more if he wanted a copy of the receipt, and he had said no with the same easy certainty, the way a person says no to something they have already settled in themselves. She had watched him pull his collar up and walk across the parking lot, and his silhouette in the wet dark was the kind of thing that stays. She mentioned it to her manager the next morning. Her manager, a man named Glenn who had been in retail management for 20 years and had developed a studied indifference to most of what he saw, listened to the whole account without speaking and then said that he was glad the balance had been cleared. He said this because it was the professional response. Then he called Donna back before she left the break room and asked her to tell it again. And she did, and Glenn sat with the masking tape detail for a moment and then sent it up the chain in an email to the regional manager later that same week. That is how things travel, sometimes. Not through announcement. Through the ordinary chain of people who could not stop thinking about what they saw. The items were picked up on the 27th of December. A woman named Carla Reed came in with her daughter, whose name was Simone, and Donna watched them from across the floor as the package was brought out. She watched Carla Reed go still when the clerk at the counter told her the balance had been paid. She watched Carla ask 3 times if there had been some kind of error. She watched Simone reach up slowly and take her mother's wrist while they waited for the answer. There was no error. Carla stood at that counter for a long moment with her hand pressed flat on the surface, not moving. When she finally spoke, she asked who had paid it. The clerk checked the slip. It said, "Only a customer, no name, no contact." Donna was across the floor and could not hear the exchange, but she saw Carla cover her mouth with both hands for a moment, then compose herself, then take the package and guide her daughter toward the door. She saw the little girl look down at the boots through the clear plastic of the bag, and then look up at her mother, and she saw Carla say something to her that made the child's whole face change. Donna did not know yet what was coming. Nobody did. Carla was 29 years old and she had been a home health aide for 6 years, and the $87.40 that a stranger had paid was the difference between Simone having Christmas boots and not having them. That was the whole of it. At that moment. A kindness she had no name to attach to from someone she had never seen. Paid in cash and gone. She took the boots home and she wrapped them in the paper she had been saving since November, and she put them under the small tree in the corner of the living room. And on Christmas morning she watched her daughter pull them out of the paper and put them on right there on the rug, and stand up and walk a slow circle in the kitchen and say they were perfect. Carla remembered that circle for a long time. She did not know the man's name. She did not know where to send a thank you. She carried the kindness the way you carry the kindness of a stranger, quietly, with nowhere to put it, grateful in a way that has no address. She went back to work in the first week of January. Her client load was 3 elderly patients, home visits Monday through Friday, a round of early morning check-ins and medication reminders, and light housekeeping. The work was not glamorous, and the pay reflected the $19 an hour, with no benefits except the ones she cobbled together herself, and there were mornings when the bus was late and the weather was wrong, and she arrived to find a situation that required more from her than she had fully gathered yet. She did the work anyway. She had been doing it for 6 years. Long enough to know that the real substance of the job was not in the medication sort or the refrigerator restock. It was in the particular way she knew to knock before entering. So she gave her clients a moment to compose themselves. It was in the way she learned over weeks and months how each person took their coffee and which subjects to leave alone and which ones to let breathe. It was in the fact that she came on Tuesdays and Thursdays without fail, and that her word was good, and that her clients knew it. One of her clients was a man named Clarence, 78 years old, a retired judge who lived alone in a tidy house on the east side of the city, and who had been her client for 2 years. He was alert and sharp and particular about his routine, and he and Carla had developed the kind of easy shorthand that comes from 2 years of Tuesday and Thursday mornings spent mostly in the quiet of a man's kitchen, him at the table with his coffee and the newspaper, her restocking the refrigerator and sorting the week's medications, and occasionally being asked his opinion on something he had read. He asked her opinion too. That was the thing about Clarence. He was the kind of man who asked what the other person thought. He had asked her once early in their arrangement what she thought about a piece in the paper about sentencing reform, and she had paused with the pill organizer in her hand, not sure if he was testing her, and then she had told him what she actually thought, carefully. And he had listened, without the particular patience of a person waiting for you to finish so they could speak. He had just listened. After that, she had understood that she was not furniture in this house, and the dynamic had shifted in a way she appreciated without ever finding the precise words for. On the second Tuesday of January, Clarence was quieter than usual. When Carla asked if he was all right, he said he was thinking about his son. He said his son had been in poor health and that he worried about him. He did not say more than that, and Carla did not press. She finished the medication sort and started on the kitchen and left him with his coffee and his thoughts. She did not know that the printing company on Route 9 was one of 3 businesses Clarence's son owned. She did not know that the maintenance technician who had paid off her layaway 11 days before was named Earl, or that Earl had worked for Clarence's son for 11 years, or that Clarence's son had been admitted to the hospital on the 29th of December with a cardiac event, and that the situation was serious enough that Clarence had spent New Year's Eve in a hospital waiting room while the rest of the city counted down the hours. She did not know any of this. She knew only that Clarence was quiet, and that she made his coffee exactly the way he liked it, and that sometimes a man's grief is better company than any noise she could make to fill it. Clarence's son was named David. He was 51 years old, and he had built the printing company from a single leased machine in a rented bay to a mid-size operation with 32 employees, and he had done it over 23 years with a carefulness and a stubbornness that his father recognized as his own. The cardiac event had been a warning, serious enough to keep him in the hospital for 6 days and to come home with a set of instructions that amounted to a single directive: slow down, or the next one will not give you the choice. David was not good at slowing down. He was the kind of man who had built something from nothing and could not quite believe it would hold together if he took his hands off it for an afternoon. The company ran fine without his constant attention and had been running fine, and Priya could have told him that with documentation going back 8 years. She had told him, in fact, on multiple occasions. He hurt her with the part of himself that understood she was right, and then he picked up his phone at 11 at night anyway. His assistant was a woman named Priya who had worked for him for 8 years and who understood that her actual job was not scheduling but buffering, standing between David and his own tendencies, between David and the decisions he would make before he had enough information, between David and the phone. He picked up at 11 at night when he should have been asleep. She was the person who reminded him of the dentist appointment he would never have made on his own, and the person who knew which suppliers would tolerate a delayed payment and which ones would not, and the person who had once, quietly, talked a mid-level client out of cancelling a contract because David had forgotten to return a call during a week when he was working 70 hours and she had covered the distance without him ever knowing. She managed the first 3 weeks of his recovery with the focused attention of someone running a controlled experiment, and mostly it worked. It was Pryor who found out about Earl. She found out through no particular investigation. The regional manager of the store had mentioned the Layaway story to a friend at a Chamber of Commerce lunch in mid-January, in the way that people mention things they cannot stop thinking about. The friend mentioned it to her husband that evening. Her husband happened to be a personal injury attorney named Ken, who had a passing acquaintance with David Booker, with David's company, and who had in the back of his mind a vague sense that David had once mentioned a long-tenured employee named Earl. He called a colleague who handled employment matters. His colleague knew David's attorney, a woman named Felice, who had handled the company's incorporation and its lease agreements and 3 employment disputes over the years, and who knew the company well enough to know that David Booker had one maintenance technician who had been with him since the beginning, a man named Earl. Felice looked at the receipt Donna, the clerk, had kept a copy of. The transaction date was December 23rd. The time was 7:41 p.m. The amount was $87.40. The notation on the slip said only a customer, but Donna had remembered the name because she had asked him to sign, and she had looked at the name while he was counting out the coins, and it had stayed with her the way a specific detail stays when the whole situation has already lodged itself in your chest. Earl Felice made 2 phone calls. She confirmed the employment, she pulled the schedule records, and confirmed that Earl had been working on December 23rd and would have been off shift by 6:30 at the latest. Route 9 to the store was 9 minutes. The timeline fit with no difficulty. She called Priya. Priya did not tell David immediately. She had been managing his stress load carefully, and she wanted to think about the right moment. She waited 4 days. She told him on a Saturday morning when he was home and the phone was quiet, and his father was coming for lunch, so the day already had a shape to it. She read him the details slowly, the way you read something to someone that you want them to really hear. The layaway, the woman, and the little girl. The 2 weeks Earl had apparently spent not being able to let go of the image of a child reaching up to take her mother's hand. The $87 in cash from a folded envelope, the declined receipt. David listened without interrupting, which was unusual for him. When she finished, he sat for a long time at the kitchen table. He said, "Earl's been with me for 11 years. She said she knew. He said, "I don't think I've ever really looked at Earl." She said, "I know. There are people in our lives who hold things up quietly for so long that we stop noticing the weight they're carrying." If you've ever had someone like that, drop their name in the comments. Because some people deserve to be said out loud. David went to see his father for lunch, and he told him the story. Clarence listened from his chair at the table with his coffee going cold in the cup, and when David finished, Clarence was quiet for a moment, and then he said that his home health aide daughter had gotten Christmas boots. David looked at him. Clarence said, "Carla, her little girl's name is Simone. She mentioned it when she came in after New Year. She said someone had paid off a layaway she was short on, and she never found out who. She said the little girl wore the boots 3 days in a row." David put his coffee cup down very carefully. He said, "Same store," Clarence said. He did not know. He said Carla had not mentioned the store by name. David called Felice that afternoon. Felice called Donna, the clerk. Donna confirmed the name on the account was Reed. Felice confirmed Carla's daughter's name through the Home Health Agency's contact records, cross-referenced against Clarence's client file Simone, the child in the red puffer vest. The little girl who had taken her mother's hand and looked back once at the counter before they pushed through the door. Earl had watched a woman and her daughter walk out of a store with nothing, and he had stood at the counter with $412 to his name, the whole of what he had saved between September and December, and he had put $87.40 of it across that counter for a child he had never met, whose name he did not know, whose mother cleaned and cooked and sorted medications for the father of the man Earl worked for every morning of his working life. Nobody had planned that, nobody had arranged it. It was simply what happened when a man with canvas shoes and a strip of masking tape on his soul decided that a little girl's Christmas mattered more than the receipts he kept. Felice sent a formal letter to Earl's address of record on the 28th of January. It was brief and professional, and it said that his employer wished to meet with him at his earliest convenience regarding a personal matter, and that his presence was requested at the company's main office on Route 9 at a time of his choosing. Earl read the letter twice. He could not think of what personal matter would require a formal letter. He had not been in any dispute. His work record was clean. He called the number at the bottom, which turned out to be Felicia's direct line, and Felicia said only that it was not a disciplinary matter and that she hoped he would come. He went on a Wednesday. He wore the canvas sneakers with the tape on the sole because they were the shoes he had, and he went in through the front entrance rather than the side door he normally used because the letter had specified the main office, and he sat in the small reception area for 6 minutes before Priya came out and walked him through. David was standing at the window of his office when Earl came in. He was thinner than he had been before December. The cardiac event had taken something from him and returned something else in its place, a kind of attention that had not been there before, a willingness to actually look. He had been standing at that window thinking about what 11 years amounted to, how many mornings Earl had come in through the side door and kept the machines running and gone home. And how many of those mornings David had passed through the building without registering Earl's presence, beyond the baseline acknowledgement one reserves for the background operations of a place that seems to run itself. The machines never broke down on David's watch. He had simply not looked carefully enough to know why. He turned when Earl came through the door. He said, "Sit down, Earl, please." Earl sat. He sat the way he did everything, without fuss, straight in the chair, hands on his knees. He was wearing the canvas sneakers with the tape on the sole. If he had dressed up for this meeting, it had not extended to the shoes, because these were the shoes he had, and Earl was not the kind of man who put on a performance he could not sustain. David sat across from him. He did not speak immediately. He looked at Earl for a moment the way you look at something that has been in your peripheral vision for 11 years and that you are finally turning to face directly. Then he told him what he knew. The store, the layaway counter, the woman and the little girl, the amount, the receipt Donna had kept, Felice tracing the name, his father's home health aid, the boots. Earl was quiet through all of it. His hands were flat on his knees and his face was careful and still. When David finished, Earl said, "It was the way she looked back." David said, "Simone." Earl said he had not known the child's name. He said the little girl had looked back once when she pushed through the door, and there had been something in that look that he could not put down. He said he did not know how else to explain it. David nodded. He said he understood. Then David slid a folder across the desk. Inside were 2 things. The first was a letter from Felice detailing a one-time bonus of $5,000, effective immediately, payable to Earl for 11 years of exemplary service, authorized and signed. The second was a company memo, 2 paragraphs, designating Earl as lead maintenance technician with a raise to $39,000 annually, also effective immediately. Earl looked at the folder. He looked at the numbers. He looked up at David. David said, "You've held this place together for 11 years, and I don't think I've told you that plainly enough. I'm telling you now." Earl said, "You didn't have to do this because of a layaway." David said, "I didn't do it because of the layaway. I did it because it made me look up and actually see what's been in front of me. The layaway just pointed the way." Earl sat with that for a moment. He was not a man who cried easily. He did not cry then. He sat straight in the chair with his hands on his knees, and he pressed his lips together once, and he nodded, and that was all the answer he gave, and David accepted it for the complete and whole thing it was. Priya was in the hall when Earl came out. She had a small paper bag from the deli 2 blocks down, the good one because she had been there for 8 years, and she understood that some moments required a sandwich. She handed it to Earl and told him lunch was on the company, and Earl took the bag and looked at it and laughed, a short, real laugh, which was the first one she had heard from him in the 3 weeks since David's hospitalization had changed the atmosphere of the building. She said, "The shoes, Earl." He looked down. She said, "We've got a company account at the supply store on Clement. I'm going to give you the account number on a card, and you are going to go this week and get yourself a proper pair of work boots. That's not a request." Earl looked at his feet for a moment. He looked at the strip of masking tape on the left sole. He looked back up at Priya. He said, "Yes, ma'am." Carla did not know any of this was happening. She was working her Tuesday and Thursday mornings with Clarence, doing her round of client visits, watching Simone get a month of steady use out of the navy blue backpack and the board game, which had become a Friday night fixture in their apartment. She was making the ordinary calculations of a home health aide in January, the question of which bills got paid first, what the schedule looked like for February, whether there was anything left over to put in the emergency fund she was trying to build back up. She came in on a Thursday in late January and found Clarence at the table as usual, but there was a second cup of coffee on the table, which was unusual, and there was a man she did not recognize sitting in the chair across from Clarence's regular chair. Clarence introduced him as his son, David. Carla said she was glad to meet him, and she hoped he was feeling better, because she had known about the hospitalization in a general way through the ordinary course of her work. David said he was feeling better. He said he had actually come to say something to her if she would allow him a moment. Carla set her bag down and waited. David told her about Earl. Not the full version, the way Priya had told him in 4 uninterrupted minutes on a Saturday morning. He told her the relevant truth, that the man who had paid the layaway was named Earl, that he was one of David's employees, that he had worked 11 years for the company, and that he had done what he did because of the way her daughter had looked back at the counter. He said Simone's look had cost her mother $87.40. He said it had cost Earl something too. He said it had made him, David, look up from his own situation long enough to reckon with some things he had been meaning to reckon with for a long time. Carla sat down in the chair across from Clarence, and she was quiet for a moment with her hands in her lap. Then she said, "I want to thank him." David said he had expected that, and he had brought Earl's phone number written in his own hand on a card, and he slid it across the table to her. She looked at it, she picked it up. She held it with both hands the way you hold something you have been wanting for a while and did not expect to actually receive. Clarence watched his son and his home health aide from across the table, and he drank his coffee, and there was a warmth in the room that had nothing to do with the radiator in the corner and everything to do with the ordinary miracle of people who do small right things without any thought of what might follow and what follows anyway. Carla called Earl that evening from her kitchen while Simone was doing homework at the table. She had washed the dinner dishes and dried her hands and stood by the window for a minute with the card in her hand before she dialed, not because she did not know what she wanted to say, but because she wanted to say it right. She had spent a month carrying a debt of gratitude with no name on it, and now she had a name, and she took a breath and dialed. Earl picked up on the 3rd ring. His voice was even and careful, the voice of a man who was not certain what was coming. She told him who she was. She told him she was Carla, and that her daughter was Simone, and that Simone had worn the boots 3 days in a row when she opened them on Christmas morning, and that she still slept with the board game on the shelf above her bed where she could see it from the pillow. She said the backpack was already in rotation for school. She said she was going to run out of things to tell him, and then she was going to have to get to the actual point, which was that she did not know how a person thanked a stranger for what he had done. Earl was quiet on the other end of the line for a moment. She could hear him breathing, and then she heard him shift, the small sound of a man resettling himself in a chair, collecting himself. Then he said, "I'm real glad to hear it." His voice was warm and a little rough around the edges, the voice of someone who did not talk extensively about the things that mattered to him, but who, when pressed, could be entirely sincere. Carla said she had been carrying the kindness with no address to send it to for a month, and she was glad to finally have somewhere to put it. Earl said she did not owe him anything. Carla said she knew that. She said she was thanking him anyway. Simone looked up from her homework at some point and looked at her mother's face, the way children track the emotional weather of the adults they depend on, and she must have seen something there, some particular quality of the moment. Because she put her pencil down and waited with the patience of a child who has learned that certain things are happening that she will understand better later. Carla hung up the phone and sat at the table with her daughter, and she told her, in the plain and honest language she used when she wanted Simone to really know something, that the man who paid for the boots called himself Earl, and he had done it because of the look she had given the door when they left the store. She said that sometimes when you don't know anyone is watching, the most important thing you do is exactly what you do then, and that Earl had been watching, and he had seen her be exactly herself in a hard moment, and that was what had happened. Simone thought about this for a while. She said he spent his own money. Carla said he did. Simone said we should do that for someone sometime. Carla looked at her daughter at the homework table with the pencil in her hand and the boots visible through the doorway where she had left them on the mat, and she felt something she did not have a precise name for, a mixture of relief and pride, and something that lived just beneath gratitude, something more like recognition. She said, "Yes, we should." That was the last week of January. February came in cold and grey, and the city went about its business the way cities do, without any awareness of the threads running through it, connecting a printing company on Route 9 to a kitchen table on the east side to a layaway counter in the middle of December. By March, Earl had a pair of steel-toed work boots, black, properly fitted, that he wore every day. He had moved $300 into a savings account he had been meaning to open for 2 years. He had called his sister in Memphis and told her not to worry about the February $20. He would double it in March. And she had asked him what had happened, and he had said nothing particular. Just some things settled the way they should. He still came in through the side door every morning. He still got there 7 minutes before his shift started. He still kept the machines running with the same careful attention he had always brought to them, the same 11-year habit of not waiting for something to break before you looked at it. None of that had changed. What had changed was something harder to name. The way David stopped in the maintenance bay, sometimes, not for a complaint, not for an urgent fix, but just to ask how things were going. The way Earl now answered with more than one word. The way the space between them, which had been 11 years of parallel lives in the same building, had narrowed into something that at least resembled acquaintance, and maybe, given time, something past that. Simone Reed turned 10 in April. Carla made her a cake with yellow frosting because yellow was her favorite color and because they had a little more room to breathe than they had had in December, a small buffer she was building back with the discipline of someone who had learned what the absence of one felt like. The board game came down from the shelf for the birthday, and 3 kids from Simone's class sat on the living room floor and played 2 rounds of it while Carla watched from the kitchen doorway. On the mat by the door, the boots. Still perfect. Kindness does not always announce itself or wait to be thanked. It moves through the world the way Earl moved through a room, quietly getting things done, not waiting for credit. Sometimes it takes a lawyer and a clerk and a retired judge and a January phone call for everyone involved to find out what actually happened, and sometimes even then the person at the center of it reaches into a folded envelope and counts out $87 in cash and does not consider for a single moment that the world might someday trace it back. It did, and he deserved to know. If you've ever done something quiet for a stranger and walked away without your name on it, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. And if this story reached you somewhere true, there's another one waiting that will do the same thing. It's right there when you're ready. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental.